Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our latest TMA virtual briefing discussing reforms to the Biometric Information Privacy Act, also known as BIPA, as well as the overall legislative outlook in Springfield. My name is Rich Carter. I'm TMA's Government Affairs Consultant, and I'll be the moderator for today's briefing. We're joined by TMA State Lobbyist David Curtin, as well as a very special guest, Assistant Senate Majority Leader Bill Cunningham of Chicago, who's a member of the Senate's Democratic Leadership Team. Senator Cunningham is also a member of the Small and Mid-Sized Manufacturing Caucus in the Senate. Good morning, gentlemen.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Thanks for joining us. Well, we're going to spend the next half hour digging into the details of Senator Cunningham's BIPA reform bill and its prospects as it moves through the Illinois House, as well as the overall outlook for legislation impacting TMA members as the General Assembly wraps up its spring session later this month. Now I'll turn it over to TMA State Lobbyist David Curtin, who will introduce our special guest. At the end of the program, TMA members will have the opportunity to ask written questions of Senator Cunningham by typing them into the Q&A tab on the Zoom control panel. David, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Rich. Good morning. Currently, Senator, you serve as the Senate President Pro Tem. This is the second most powerful position in the Senate and carries a lot of responsibility. Can you give us briefly some of your background and why did you get into public service?
Sure. Thanks for having me on this morning, guys. Really appreciate the partnership I've formed with the organization over the last year or so. It's been very helpful to me. I've been a member of the Senate since 2013. I also served 2 years in the Illinois House prior to that. I represent a district that encompasses portions of the southwest side of Chicago and several southwest suburbs. I live in the Chicago section of my district in a neighborhood called Beverly, where I've lived my entire life. I kind of grew up a teenage political geek. Was always interested in politics. Studied political science in college, and then when I graduated, I did what any good Chicago boy does who's interested in politics, and went and knocked on the door of my alderman and volunteered and worked on campaigns and worked in his office. And his name was Mike Sheehan, was our alderman at the time. Some people might remember that name. He got elected Cook County Sheriff, and I served with him in the Cook County Sheriff's Office actually for a long time. I spent 20 years working in the Cook County Sheriff's Office in communications, always as a civilian in communications. And then the last 4 years, I was chief of staff to Tom Dart, the current sheriff. And then, as I said, ran for the House in 2010, got elected in 2011. So that's my background.
That's great. Well, you've got a district here with small and mid-sized manufacturers in your district. Have you become acquainted with some of them? And
Sure. Yes, I have. I have a couple clusters in my, particularly in Alsip. One of the suburbs I represent has a large cluster of manufacturers out. Oak Lawn does as well. Not long ago, I visited Meyer Tool and Manufacturing on Southwest Highway in my district. And, one of the things that I've seen this at other manufacturing facilities too, what you learn is so many of these companies are family businesses that, might be second, third generation working in the field. And, to see these things happening sometimes in, warehouses or buildings or even storefronts that I've driven by for a long time and not really understand what's going on behind those closed doors it's really interesting as a legislator to go and see those things and understand how important they are to the community and all the people they employ, and really how there's often a family atmosphere in those buildings. And the other benefit that is really important is all the good paying jobs that we see in those facilities. So I always understood how important manufacturing was to the state and to my district, but you never really fully understand it till you get inside a plant and talk to the people and see what sometimes some pretty incredible work going on inside. And it's been a privilege to be able to do those things as a state legislator.
That's great. Yeah. Well, let's talk BIPA reform.
Mm-hmm.
Specifically, the Biometric Information Privacy Act has been law for years, and it's meant to protect individuals' biometric data. But the law was being interpreted by the courts to say a company has to get an employee's permission every time they use the biometric scan, as opposed to just signing once and then they're okay. But the court's current interpretation of the BIPA law has resulted in a lot of major lawsuits our companies are facing and threats of lawsuits. But you're spearheading a BIPA reform bill through the General Assembly that would prevent these overbearing lawsuits and on small and mid-sized manufacturers. Can you tell us about this and its chances of becoming a law?
Sure, David, and you and I have talked a lot about this, and David's done a good job advocating on behalf of businesses in Springfield in favor of BIPA reform. I first got involved in this issue probably about 5 or 6 years ago when I was approached by a non-for-profit nursing home in my district, Smith Village. It's sued under the BIPA law, and many of your members will, I think, relate to this, because they had recently adopted a digital fingerprinting system to keep track of timekeeping. And every day, their employees, and they have about 120, 150 employees, something like that, every day, every employee would give 4 fingerprints to check in at the beginning of the day, check out at lunch, come back from lunch, and check out at the end of the day. And they got sued. And under the strict reading of the statute, the damages they were facing were based on every single time a fingerprint swipe was taken. So they were looking at massive liability. There were a couple of appellate court cases at the time. That's when I first introduced legislation on this. We actually at one point held a bill because we thought there was going to be a positive ruling by an appellate court, which ended up being a mistake because it was not a positive ruling by the appellate court, and it just sort of further enshrined this massive accumulation of liability that a lot of businesses were facing. You know, part of the problem was BIPA was passed in 2008, and the intentions were good to protect our biometric data. No one wants to lose that in a data breach. No one wants their fingerprints or facial recognition images sold. And that was the intent of BIPA, but the enforcement that was put in place was just far too onerous and really was not made for the way technology very quickly thereafter would be used. So there were many attempts to reform this. Finally, earlier this year, we moved a bill out of the Senate. It's pending in the House right now. I am confident it will pass the House and be signed by the governor. And essentially what this bill does is answers an invitation that the Supreme Court issued in a decision they handed down last year, the Catherine versus White Castle case, where the Supreme Court said, you know, we're looking at this statute and you know, we can't assume what the legislative intent is. We're looking at the plain language. And the plain language says, yeah, liability accrues every time you do a fingerprint. Now, they knew in saying that White Castle, which used a digital fingerprinting system for all sorts of human resources purposes, was facing a $17 billion liability potentially. And the Supreme Court said this is, you know, an extreme, but it's what the law says. Unfortunately, the law is creating a condition they termed annihilative liability, that the liability is so great it puts a company out of business. So they invited us to, they invited legislature and said, if this is the way you guys want things to be, you should tell us. So that we responded to that invitation with the bill I passed in the Senate. And in short, what this will do under the new law is say that liability only accrues on a per person basis, not on a per swipe basis. So this will rein in liability to a fraction of where it is now. Businesses will still face sanctions if they don't follow the law. And by the way, the best way to avoid being sued is to get written consent from anyone you take biometric material from. And we made that easier in the bill too. You can now get consent through an electronic signature. So that's what we do in the bill. I think it's a really big win for businesses in Illinois. It got a big bipartisan majority in the Senate. I expect the same will happen in the House, and I'm hopeful that early this summer the governor will sign it into law.
Well, we think it's a very good bill and a very good way to address this issue, and appreciate your work on it. So, um, the we're having a little bit of audio difficulty, but we're not doing too bad here today. But let me ask you about other measures in the General Assembly. The remaining days, adjournment day is supposed to be May 24th, and so we've got a few days left. What types of measures do you see small and mid-sized manufacturers facing in the remaining days of the session in Springfield that might directly affect them?
Yeah, we're moving in, and tell me, David, if I'm going out, maybe the Wi-Fi here at the hotel might not be
Okay.
working all that well. I can switch to my phone. Let me know if I'm cutting out. We're at that time of the year in Springfield where we're really focused on the budget. I will say that this year it's been kind of a light legislative year. That's usually the case in the second year of a General Assembly. We're in the 103rd General Assembly, the second year of it, and it's usually a lighter legislative year. That's probably for
We have some difficulty there.
legislation. So focused on the budget right now. I'll do switch a little at the hotel I stay in Springfield is often
Okay.
a little bulky. So if I switch over to just much stronger, so we're focused on the budget right now, and that's really taking up a lot of the oxygen. There are a couple issues that could have an impact on manufacturers. Right now, what we're looking at is a shortage in our workers' comp budget. This is created a situation. I'm the Senate Democratic representative on something we call the workers' compensation agreed bill process. One of the things we do in Springfield when there's an adjustment to the workers' compensation law or fees or anything like that, we convene a bipartisan working group to try to reach an agreed bill. We have labor, business at the table, others, to try to reach a consensus. One thing we're working on right now is a projected deficit for the workers' comp worker comp commission. They are funded completely by the fee that is charged on workers' comp insurance plans, and it's kind of a good news, bad news thing because workers' comp premiums have gone down so much in the state since the 2012 reform. We went from the second highest workers' comp premiums in the country. Now we're at about the 22nd due to those reforms. But as a result of that, the fees that are paid in the workers' comp insurance have not kept up with inflation because the premiums are lower. So we're engaged right now in trying to figure out a way to pay for that that might end up in a microscopic fee increase that would potentially, I mean, we'd be talking annual for an average size workers' comp insurance payment of increase of somewhere between about $50 and $100 in order to fund the commission. But that is still under negotiation right now and something that we would work on. When we do these things, there's usually a give and take. If business has to pay more, then we look at potential costs related to the benefits to even things out. And that's something we're working on right now that I think we will have hammered out by the end of May. So stay tuned. I'll certainly stay in touch with David about this. This is a problem that was just flagged in the last week or two that we've just started meeting.
Okay. And do you expect the General Assembly to adjourn on May 24th? I mean, traditionally you guys have done it, but
Yep. Yeah, we're May 31st is technically the day we really, the last day of the session calendar. After May 31st, to pass anything the rest of the year, you need supermajority votes. So traditionally, we try to make to wrap up by the 31st. This year and last year, we scheduled our last day about a few days before that deadline. If we don't get it today, this year it's scheduled for May 24th. There's a possibility we could go a couple days beyond that, but I don't see there being any possibility we're after May 31st.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Well, thanks a lot, Leader Cunningham.
Yep.
While you and I have been talking, our members have been typing questions into the chat box. I'll turn it over to Rich now. Thank you.
Thank you, David and Leader Cunningham. Now it's time for questions and answers with TMA members. Again, for those of you who are on your computers or if you're using the mobile app, you can type your question, submit it through the Q&A tab on the Zoom control panel, and I'll read the questions and ask Leader Cunningham to answer them. In the meantime, I'll ask Leader Cunningham the first question pre-submitted by a TMA member. The question is, Senator, we appreciate your work on BIPA. That's important, but our biggest concern right now is trying to find skilled workers. Can the state of Illinois do anything to help us find employees? Senator?
Yeah, this is something I hear almost everywhere I go, whether it's manufacturers. I was having lunch at a restaurant down the street from my office the other day and was hearing this from a restaurant owner. I've heard it from school districts, talking to superintendents and principals that they're having a hard time finding teachers. Seemingly every industry in the state right now is having a hard time with workforce development. So there's a couple ways we're trying to address that. In the manufacturing space, we're investing a lot of money in pre-apprentice programs where we're trying to grab kids, frankly, 17, 18, 19, 20-year-old high school students, maybe people who have recently graduated from high school, could be enrolled at a community college, and get them into pre-apprentice programs to get them thinking about very skilled jobs and try to get them trained up in a way where they're available for employment with manufacturers. We know you're going to have to do some additional training. We also do have training grants. I want to say it's somewhere around $5 million a year that we make available to companies to partner with these various groups to do workforce training. The other thing we're starting to spend more money on is, I mentioned community colleges earlier, and this is something I would like to see us invest more money in, is at a community college level. Unlike universities that, and I'm trying not to be too critical of universities, but I think this is just a fact. They tend to be insular and, have certain disciplines and lines of study that they've set up and had in place forever. Community colleges are very adaptable, and they will often look at an area in the district they serve where there's a shortage of employees, and they can put training programs right in place to address those. I've seen this happen in my district. For instance, with Moraine Valley Community College, there's a lot of hospitals in my 3 major hospitals in my district. And they really rely on Moraine Valley to train nurses assistants, respiratory therapists, x-ray technicians, and they can get them a certificate in a matter of months and get them working. I think we need to do some of that with manufacturing. I can tell you Moraine Valley is committed to that. They were actually in Springfield last week lobbying for a grant to set up a manufacturing training center in Moraine Valley. I'm working along with some of my Senate colleagues on securing them a grant for that. So I think that's really the best way government can help out with that area, that is in training and making sure we have a workforce that is prepared to go to work for your company.
Thanks, Senator. Again, if you'd like to ask a question, please type your question into the Q&A tab on the Zoom control panel, and I'll ask the Senator the question. We do have a question submitted by a TMA member going back to BIPA. Senator says, will the BIPA amendment bill be modified to make it clear that it is retroactive? Every law firm bulletin I have read says It would not be retroactive unless specifically identified as such in the new law. Senator?
Okay. So this is frankly a little bit of a gray area in the law. What we did, and this gets a little bit complicated, but oftentimes when we pass bills, we will assign legislative intent to those bills on the record, on the floor of the Senate or the floor of the House when we present the bills. That's what we did in an attempt to address retroactivity with this BIPA law. During that legislative intent, we said, while the bill is not specifically retroactive, a judge can take can review of what we've done here and take judicial notice of this law and essentially decide how they want to apply it. So we're essentially kicking the issue of retroactivity to the judges. One of the reasons why we were reluctant to be more clear, more specific about retroactivity was a pushback about potentially undoing previously agreed to judgments. And during the course of the negotiation, that was a place we did not go because we thought it could potentially derail the bill. So through legislative intent, we've essentially left it up to a judge. I think, from what I've been told by our attorneys, what will happen is if you have a pending lawsuit, based on an alleged violation that happened 2 years ago, and it's pending in the court, the judge will take notice of the fact that we just answered the Illinois Supreme Court's invitation to give specific guidance to the courts about how liability should be accrued. And this bill very clearly states, and we say this in legislative intent, that we did not intend annihilative liability. We intend liability to be assigned on a per person basis, not a per violation basis. And that is the key of all these BIPA cases. Remember, very, very few, I think only 2 or 3 BIPA cases have actually gone to trial. Every one of them have settled, and they've settled over this argument about how does liability accrue. And they settled because the defendants were worried about annihilative liability, that the liability was going to be so great, they, just threw a few $1 million, in some cases a lot more than a few $1 million, at the plaintiffs because they were fearful for how big it would go. Our law clearly reins in that liability, tells the court this is our intent, and I believe judges that have pending cases will look at our specific answer to a specific question from the Supreme Court and apply these penalties on a per person basis, not a per swipe basis or per violation basis.
Thanks, Senator, for that explanation. Again, if you'd like to ask a question, please type your question on the Q&A tab on the Zoom control panel. We do have another question for the Senator. The question is, bipartisanship is a great word, but when one party has supermajorities in both chambers and controls all the executive offices, they don't really need the other party for anything. As a leader in the supermajority party, do you think it's important to work with the other party, and why? Senator?
I do. And I think if you talk to the Republican members of the Illinois Senate, they will tell you that I am among the most bipartisan members of the legislature. I would say the overwhelming majority of bills that I've passed throughout my career have been passed on bipartisan roll calls, including the BIPA bill. The premise of the question is correct. We have supermajority. The Democrats have supermajorities. In that respect, you can argue, you can say, oh, there's no need to work with Republicans. I think that results in bad outcomes. I've never introduced a bill that I haven't been open to an amendment on, and oftentimes accept amendments from opponents, and opponents to the bill that even when I put their amendment on remain opponents because that often makes for a better bill. I also think it just gives government more credibility when that happens. And, I would be hesitant, to anyone on this call today to automatically assume that there's this intractable partisanship in Springfield. I'd invite you to come to Springfield and watch the way some of the bills work. Is there partisanship? Absolutely. But the overwhelming majority of bills that pass through Springfield are passed on bipartisan roll calls. There are certain things where that doesn't happen. There are individuals on both extremes that thrive on partisanship, but there's also a very healthy number of members who very intentionally try to work in the middle and try to make sure we have bipartisan roll calls on bills. Don't always achieve it, but I always think it's worth trying. And I think it happens more than most people who don't spend time in Springfield think.
Great. Thanks, Senator. All right. I think we have one more question here for the senator. And the question is, why do we always give huge tax incentives to lure out-of-state companies to come to Illinois and set up shop, but we do nothing to help retain companies who have been here for decades? Senator?
Yeah, I think that that's a legitimate criticism. We get involved in this a lot. The media falls into this. We as elected officials fall into this, kind of looking at the shiny objects. And when you lure an out-of-town manufacturer, any kind of business, and that gets the headlines and generates a lot of excitement. And it, as I said, draws the media's eyes and draws elected officials because it does provide headlines and shows progress in a way that you don't always see with small and mid-sized businesses because it doesn't make news. So I've tried to address that. I have a bill pending right now, for instance, that would provide property tax relief, a property tax credit to small businesses that that own their own property and have to pay property taxes. Would allow them to take a credit on their income or corporate taxes. My colleague, Senator Laura Murphy, has a bill pending right now that would say any business grants that the state lets out, that 50% of them have to go to small and mid-sized businesses. I think there's a recognition that, as I said, we've gone too much for the shiny object, and that a lot of work needs to be done in some of the less glamorous but more important business retention strategies.
That's great. Thank you, Leader Cunningham. All right. Well, unfortunately, we've run out of time. Leader Cunningham, do you have any closing thoughts for TMA members?
Well, I just thank for this opportunity to get to talk to you. Really enjoy the relationship I've established with the association. I will also say I'm a sucker for field trips. So if there are any manufacturers in my area that want to invite me to come for a visit, especially during the summer when we're not in session in Springfield, I'm very open to that. So please, reach out to David and let him know, or reach out directly to my office. But I'd love to come and see what you do and learn about your business and see how we can help you in Springfield.
That's great, Senator. We do have several members in your district, so we will be reaching out to them.
Excellent.
Hope we can set up some visits.
That'd be great.
All right. Great. Well, that's about it for today's virtual briefing. I want to thank Senator Bill Cunningham for joining us today, along with TMA State Lobbyist David Curtin for leading a wonderful discussion. And of course, we want to thank all of our TMA members who took the time out of their day to join us today. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day and a great weekend. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Thanks.